met KEBS, we've met Ministry of Agriculture, we've interacted with farmers, and it was your turn today. We are still meeting other mentioned or interested parties concerning this fake fertilizer saga, so that we can be able to do our report and table it in Parliament for appropriate action to be taken. Well, I wanted to ask, did any NCBB request for audience with African Uncensored to clarify areas of falsehood or misrepresentation or sensation? And because they claim that they were denied audience by yourselves, and you ended up publishing a lopsided documentary. Hi, number two, was there a court order stopping you from publishing the documentary? Who had sought the court order? We also require from you, if you interacted with KEBS, if you interacted with NCBB, if you wrote to them letters requesting for the audience, you furnish us with the same, so that copies of the same for our record.
I would want to know firstly, when exactly did you carry out this investigation? Because as you would be aware, the fertilizer subsidy began with the last regime, and you have ably put the former president talking about 5 billion that was to be expended to farmers to cushion them against the skyrocketing prices of fertilizer at the time. So is this an expose that was done during the last regime? And we also understand the complexities involved in investigations, that it found its way again into this new regime? Or is it one that only happened during the this cycle of administration? Number two is, I know you're duty bound to protect your sources, whistleblowers, because we understand where we are coming from as a country. Are you experiencing any challenge where people are compelling you to share your source of information, and therefore how does that sit with the welfare and safety of those who volunteer to give you information? The other question is, being an expensive endeavor, because we have seen your crew in Gilgil, in Meru, in Yatta, and many other places. Who is funding you? And what is your motivation at the end of the day? Again, you went public a few weeks ago telling us about attempts by certain government officials to compromise the release of this information out of the expose. Would you want to be a little more candid with this information with us? And lastly, generally, how safe is Africa Uncensored? Have you received any threats on your license, threats on members of your team, and threats on you as the CEO, John Allan Namu? And lastly, how do you determine which media house to partner with in letting the public know this? Because we acknowledge there are so many television stations in the country. So what then is your criteria for settling on one media house and leaving out the rest, I think?
According to your documentary, it's more touching on the year 2022/2023. Currently, as a committee in agriculture, we have been going around the country to investigate and to get to the bottom of this fake fertilizer from our farmers.
Documentary, and Egerton's reputation in terms of its laboratory, I think, is also well known. On the rebranding of GPC, SBL, I'll ask Sam and Cynthia to comment.
In the course of our investigation, we realized that the product was repackaged. There was a difference in the branding of the bags. As you can see, what you are able to find that coincides with what was on the secret filming, we were only able to find it in Meru. And but now the new packaging actually, I think, began somewhere in early 2023. So it's just that the branding of the packaging in terms of the design was changed, but the product was the same according to the lab results.
Yeah, and I think KEBS might be able to provide even further context around the rebranding of that product, because they say that they sent Mr. Kariuki's organization, various organizations, a caution around the sale and the branding of the product that he had between 2022 and 2023. And I think it was at that time that rebranding happened, but I think KEBS might be able to provide a more substantial answer to that. To Mr. Salasia, was Mr. Kariuki an opportunist? Honorable Salasia, I think you're asking me to wade in matters of opinion. My opinions of him are really my opinions of him, and I think what we can speak to is in terms of the facts that we're able to uncover. What that spoke to factually was opportunism. Opportunism in the shape of being able to take advantage of farmers who are looking for cheap inputs to be able to support the soil health during the planting season. Opportunism in the shape of actually not going through the process of legitimately creating fertilizer, and opportunism in the shape of using cheap inputs, things that aren't passable as fertilizer, but being able to sell them off using, perhaps exploiting gaps in Kenya's procurement system, and that, I think, would be the way I describe Joe Kariuki's opportunism. As you saw, we also looked into his past, and there's very rich ground for further investigation. I think I'll leave it at that.
Chair, from the expose you can see that there was several interviews between African Censured and Mr. Kariuki. He later on walked back by going to court to apply a freeze on exposing the whole thing. Could you, as Africa Censured, might have shared with him the main reason why you were interviewing him? Because I cannot be open to an interview and later rush to court to prevent you from airing my own version of the story. So is there an information that you concealed and therefore he was going to court to stop airing that information? And number two, and finally, I did ask you, recognizing the slippery terrain that you guys operate under, whether you or members of your staff or the license held by African Censured have been exposed to any degree of threat by this regime, because you ruffle feathers of those who sit in high echelons of power. And if that is the case, then as a committee, we can also look into it.
Thank you very much, Honorable Okello. In terms of sharing the reasons why we interviewed him, I mean, I think this is well covered in policy around right of response.
we wrote a very comprehensive letter of right of response, offering him opportunity to comment on some of the questions that we had, and the questions were drawn from the evidence that we found in the field. Cynthia and Sam, would you like to add some of the questions, for instance, just to give the members of Parliament and the committee a flavour of what it is that we asked?
I first reached out to Mr. Kariuki on the 12th of January 2024. It was on a Friday. I reached out via phone call and I followed it up with a text. And my initial question was to interview him on the role of GPC, his product, or the fact that it's being sold under the subsidy program. That was my first question. My second question was about the complaints that we've received from farmers on the poor quality of the fertilizer. I followed it up with an email a few days later. That should be on the 18th of January, after he reached out back to us on phone and also via an email from his lawyer. By then, he was being represented by a different lawyer. So we accorded him a video interview on the 19th of January, which was conducted by my colleagues Sam and Clint Obere, who is not here, and Elijah Kanye. We also did another right of response just when we were about to publish the story, where we gave him an opportunity now to respond also on what you were able to capture on our secret filming. And that was done towards the end of February or early March. But we do have the emails, we're going to provide that.
Oh, actually, I'm sorry, go ahead.
I was saying in the second right of response, we told him what exactly we had found out from our investigation. That's the time he rushed to court.
And all of the documentation that you've requested will be availed to you, hopefully through the clerk. As we understood this invitation, we thought we were being invited purely for the screening, so we hadn't prepared hard copies for you. But all of that will be provided through the clerk of this committee. To the second question, whether members of staff have been exposed to any degree of threat by this regime, to me specifically, nobody officially in their official capacity have exposed me to any level of threat. Perhaps what you've seen and that played out in the public were the kinds of defamatory comments and remarks that were being made by the Honorable Cabinet Secretary for Agriculture, calling us crooks, and saying that, that we should be dealt with like highway robbers. So in as much, I don't want to read too much into the meaning of what he, I don't want to read too much into what he meant when he said that we should be dealt with like highway robbers, but I think it's generally understood how highway robbers should be dealt with. I think beyond that, there haven't been any direct threats or derogatory comments that have been made to us directly, save for others that have also been made by, I believe it was the senator for Nakuru County, who's also been very outspoken on this issue. And I think in our subsequent discussion after the members of the press leave, then I can give you further context on that.
Chair, we know how highway robbers are dealt with. I mean, we live in this country, and coming from a person who is not ordinary, a cabinet secretary anywhere in the world, sits at a very high and vantage position. My question is, having heard this, have you recorded any statement with the police so that whatever then will happen to you, there's a thread upon which we can follow? Or you just ignored it and said, these are politicians, they just talk, and it is just empty talk?
That's just as true, though. It's true, though.
Honorable Okello, we chose on the advice of a number of people who advised us not to pursue this with the police or in court. We felt that that would be a distraction from what the real issue is here, which is the provenance and the validity of fertilizer. And our job really was to really place in front of the public the plight of farmers who are exposed to this and the possible threats to Kenya's food security. So in so doing, we felt that that comment that was made should be taken as one that's made politically, although we do reserve the right at any later stage to then pursue this with the police and relevant authorities. But at this stage, we'd like to treat this as somewhat of a distraction and hopefully play our part in keeping members of the public focused on what is a very serious national issue.
More radio, 88.2 FM. We are in charge.
We've met NCBB, we've met KEBS, we've met Ministry of Agriculture, we've interacted with farmers, and it was your turn today. We are still meeting other mentioned or interested parties concerning this fake fertilizer saga, so that we can be able to do our report and table it in Parliament for appropriate action to be taken. Well, I wanted to ask, did any NCBB request for audience with African Uncensored to clarify areas of falsehood or misrepresentation or sensation? And because they claim that they were denied audience by yourselves and you ended up publishing a lopsided documentary. Number two, was there a court order stopping you from publishing the documentary?